Goals are dreams with deadlines. Diana Scharf, a great quote to start off today. Welcome. My name is Jürgen Moors. I'm a coach, a strategic advisor, and a consultant. And welcome to this 30-day live stream about entrepreneurship. And welcome to week number 4. And like I indicated yesterday, we will look at some more advanced topics this week and some long-term strategies for your entrepreneurial projects and for your role as an entrepreneur. And I kicked off with goals are dreams with deadlines for once. Yeah, I have a dream with deadline. I'm also doing some construction at home. So you see behind me, we had to move and remove some of the stuff. So my desk is a little bit more messy than it used to be, or it normally is. But I will clean up in a couple of days when the work is done. But I also use that because today, we will focus on how to align your entrepreneurial projects with your corporate goals. And when you work for a corporation as an entrepreneur, then there are always deadlines that are coming from the corporate structure that you're in. It can be a deadline for the project that they approved for you as an entrepreneur, but also a corporate structure or a large organization also shifts direction depending on how the current can come from anywhere. It can be an economical current, it can be a political current, how this goes. And it can be a small shift, it can be a bigger shift. You're not always very clear of that, but it means that you should have or try to realize your dreams with a certain deadline as an entrepreneur. But again, remember, be adaptable in it. Now, how can you align your entrepreneurial projects with your corporate goals? Like any good employee, of course, you should know your organization's mission, vision, and strategic objectives. And there are still a lot of people inside organization that are not so aware of it. And it should not be a mantra that you could state anywhere you are and say grace to the flag. No, this is something completely out. You should know what in the long term is the mission of my company, what is the vision where we want to go to, and what are in the long term, the midterm, and the short term, the strategic objectives that we are after. If we want to, I worked in the chemical industry for a very long time. So at a certain point in time, the goal was to become CO2 neutral. But this meant also for us as a company that we would have to do a lot of additional investments. Some would be subsidized, but there would also be a lot of money that would need to be generated by the business in order to make this green transition. So one of the topics that was always on the table was how can we become more efficient, more and operational excellence in order to generate or free up capital in the end to make this green shift. So I knew that these objectives, the green shift, these were one, and another, the operational excellence, or was the second one. Now, I already discussed before, as an entrepreneur, you not only focus on the operational excellence in its incremental way, because there you can only gather the small amounts. You use that to bring the capital, so it's just one part of your project portfolio. But a big part of your project portfolio should also be those breakthrough and those radical innovations, because a lot of times that's where you can create the big bucks. In the incremental ways, there's a lot of money on the table if you want, but the big bucks are really when you do these breakthrough innovations or these radical innovations. So that's why you should understand. Okay, what's the long-term vision of my company, and how can my projects add to that as well? Now, how can you identify and align your opportunities that you have with your corporate goals? And there are many different ways, because corporate goals, like I said, they can come in many different ways, meaning you have the short term, like I said, the midterm, and the long term. And typically the short term is 1 to 2 years, where they want to enter a certain market in 1 to 2 years. In the midterm, they want enter a certain region, for instance, and the long term it can be something over the course of 5 or 10 years, something that needs to grow. If I reflect again to my own business, like I said before, a long-term goal was this CO2 neutrality. But it was a period where I said, okay, this would take 20 to 30 years. That's one thing. And again, if you take this long term, you can focus on short term. And there we yesterday we talked about, or the day before, about the 80-20 Pareto. Well, where they would focus on as a business was first looking at the big chunks. Which projects can we do to have it on the short term to midterm, a couple of years, because it takes a while before you actually build a huge plant to capture CO2, for instance. Um, but how can we have a big impact on the short term, and the smaller things are something that comes later to get to this absolute zero. But also as an application for you, so you also to focus on the big chunks in the beginning, and not start at looking at how can I save 1 kilograms of CO2 when, for instance, you have gigatons at the moment where everybody is coping with. Um, you have the midterm. At the time, the company that I worked for was also investing heavily in Asia, so a lot of funds were going there to construct a completely new site. Meaning we also needed to make sure that, especially in Europe, we could find ways to free up capital to actually help free up money for that. Meaning we needed a more efficient approach. And one way was, for instance, the technological wave, the digital wave, the 4.0 wave that already started in 2015, 2016, and it was still rolling out. Everybody thought in the period 23, 24, 22, after COVID, that the digital wave was a little bit behind us. But no, we are now in the implementation phase. We first had the visionary phase where a lot of experiments were going on. But in the meantime, we are more in the implementation phase. And you see that a lot of technologies are actually reaching a degree where they start having more impact. And because technology is already moving really, really fast at the moment, you can see based on this first experimentation wave, the second wave is coming, and AI is, for instance, part of that second wave. So looking at where you can really bring things for your organization as an entrepreneur, it can be in your day-to-day business. How can I make my present role or my present team more efficient? You can look at the long-term and the mid-term projects and goals of your company. You can look at, but like I said, you can also be an entrepreneur with products. So we already identified that customers are a good basis. So thinking and listening to your customers where they want to go in the short and long term can also generate um, projects, ideas, products for you as an entrepreneur to move forward to with certain opportunities and projects. So that's also how you identify those opportunities. Now, how you come up with the value proposition to align it with the corporate objectives that we already discussed before, that we typically have the business case. But the business case is easier when it's really tangible and on the short term, because there you, for instance, can exactly say from, yeah, next year, the a certain business unit has made a certain expectation towards what they will sell, and this will be the amount of money that they will make from it. This is how I can add with my project in it. When it's something in the long run, for instance, when we talk about CO2 in the long run, there is in Europe the CO2 pricing where you have to pay for a certain amount of CO2 that you emit, and every year, in the beginning of in the beginning of the system, there were a lot of free CO2 amounts distributed, and every year a part of that starts to diminish and vanish. So the price of CO2 goes up. So you have to learn to work with these CO2 prices and a certain expectation or vision for the future, how that will evolve over the course of time. And this can help you design or fund your project. Um, Also, other stuff, to give you one example out of my past, for instance, at the time as a utilities operations manager, I was also responsible for the wastewater treatment plant. And wastewater treatment plant, you always have a certain low, let's say very, very low amount of products still remaining inside the wastewater stream. And these are completely safe to bring them into a larger body of water. Now, with regulations evolving, they would go stricter and stricter and stricter. So you can wait for one way to be forced to do something, or you can say from, no, I want to have a vision where we can change that. And the vision that I created was, if I looked at the amount of water, fresh water, the site took in, and the amount of almost clean water that we would emit, these numbers were perfectly aligned. So if we could, at a certain point in time, close what we emit and bring it back to the front of the loop, we could come into a closed loop. Now, there were some challenges because you would say, why don't you do it right now? Well, one of the challenges was that throughout the process that it moved from as fresh water through the site, it was used many, many times before it actually ended up in the wastewater. And then it would be emitted because we were close to the ocean. We were in an area where the water was saline water anyhow, so there was a lot of salinity in it. So we emitted also water with a high salt content. And if you look at all the projects we looked at, or I looked at also as an entrepreneur to see from, okay, how can we close the loop? Exactly, this high amount of salt was an issue, and because a lot of the technologies that we evaluated had a problem with the high amount of salt, so we still had to cover the technology or find a way to work with work with the salt load and in a way to close the loop. And to give you as an entrepreneur again, what were the opportunities, or how do we looked at it? We said, okay, the salt in the end to get it out in a big stream with a high amount of salt in it or high salinity factor is very costly and very challenging for technology. Is there another way stream upwards where you can actually look and see from where is the salt coming from? Are there certain streams that are having more salt, or are there certain streams that are having no salt at all? And can we start with them maybe? So looking at an entrepreneur, I already said it, when you look at your projects, when you define your projects, um, look at the holistic way. And what I talk about today, when you think about corporate goals and aligning with corporate goals, it is often about that holistic way. If you look at freeing up capital through operational excellence for a bigger investment wave or whatever, then this is an holistic goal of the company. When I just talked about, I gave the example already a couple of times about CO2 neutrality. This is an holistic goal for the company. That should also be a holistic goal for you as an entrepreneur. The same thing with the impact on the environment. If you want to bring down your environment, if you want to create an internal loop where you say, from again, I almost take no more resources from the world, and I keep on using as much as I can within my own cycles, and I clean up every time my own cycle. So I take minimal amounts and I discharge minimal amounts also from that cycle as a company. That is also an holistic goal. It's there where the big projects, the big impact that you may look for as an entrepreneur, you will find them. It's in the big corporate goals. But like I said, when you are just the beginning at your journey as an entrepreneur, don't start off with them. Understand how they can add to them, but don't start with the projects that immediately have this big impact, because there are a lot of skills and skill sets and trial and error, and you have to refine your skill set. We discussed that in the last 3 weeks to make sure that you can actually bring such a project to the end of it. Now, how do you communicate this value proposition once you have designed it? Again, it's understanding the corporate objectives in the midterm and the long term. If you are looking at these bigger projects with bigger impact, you have to realize for yourself that such projects take time, take a lot of effort, personal effort, but also take a lot of money and a lot of resources in general way. It can be engineering resources, can be people, it can be internal and external relationships. So that means that you have to find a way to, how can I move this project knowing that in that time period, like I talked about with my 10-year project, I know that economy will go up and down. I know that leadership will change. I know that the goals and the objectives might shift a little bit. So all of these things you need to build into your project, have a sound project on the long term to be successful. Because if you don't tackle these things in advance, then you will probably somewhere get lost along the way. Your project will get lost along the way. It may be stopped along the way, and then most of the value, the impact that you are aiming for, is lost. And that should be very clear in your value proposition. You should make very clear, where is the value actually popping up? At what points in your time frame will the value pop up? And try to put some metrics on there as well. Let's say this is the point that we reach after 3 years or 4 years. This is the point that we reach after, let's say, 6 or 7 years. This is where we expect to be in 10 years. And try to bring in even a certain sensitivity where you say from if this should materialize, one of the risks, for instance, then we see a negative adjustment to those levels or to those levels. And if it's a positive side, then this is, for instance, also a way that the sensitivity can go up and we can bring more money in, yes or no. So try to visualize it, especially for the bigger impact long-term project. For the smaller ones, when you're at the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey, yeah, a lot of the projects you do is 1 2 years. The amount of resources that you use is rather limited or really confined. So it is also important that you understand it and you can bring it. But the importance really becomes high when you look at long-term and high impact projects, when you deliver your pièce de la résistance as an entrepreneur. The same thing returns, engaging again with stakeholders. And especially when you look at corporate goals, it's often the executive levels, it's often strategic groups. They typically think differently. So understanding what creating a strategy is for a company, what is looked at when it is about strategy, what those people and those units, strategic units, corporate controlling, um, the executive suite and what they are looking for is also really very, very much important. And you should engage with them as a stakeholder. I'm sorry. As I said already before, when I spent my time in Germany, I learned this also to understand the way that they were thinking in their projects, that they also had a certain personal goal often, where they wanted to also have an impact or leave a mark on history at the time when they were part of the executive suite. So learn to understand those strategies, learn to understand how you can bring projects there, the way you bring your project to your employees or to your colleagues. Yeah, your message should be different when you bring it there. They look at different things. They don't look at the last euro, but they will look at how does it fit into the company. And especially when you come up with these bigger impact projects, you will have to think like an executive to sell it to your colleague executives at that point in time. Well, that's the way that you should look at it, because if you look at them as the gods of the company, it's really hard to step into them and share them your project. And you should look at them from, no, I'm also an executive, and I'm gonna present something to my colleague executives. It's a matter a little bit of the mindset that you also bring yourself in this long-term thinking role. And sometimes it helps to have the ambition to get into the executive level, just to learn and to adopt strategies and the thinking patterns that they actually have. Now, long-term projects, meaning they will be tracked. So also looks at ways how can I track it, and in many different ways. It's not only the successes and the money that it brings and the costs, but also a lot of times the setbacks when you are going for instance, and CO2 neutrality is a very good example of that, or low impact environmental impact is also a very good example of that, because you rely in a lot of moments on developments in technologies, and as we all know, it might be slower, and in a lot of cases it is slower, a lot slower, or they might not materialize at all. So the risk register, your long-term risk register, will look differently from the risk register you create when it's only 1 or 2 years in a project. So your risks also are at a completely different level, and how you will cope with those risks will also be in a completely different level. And we already talked about this somewhere in the last 3 weeks as well, and that's sometimes we keep on driving projects and putting money in it because we think somewhere down the line it might change, because we invested so hardly in it. And it can be an emotional investment, a mental investment. It can also be a financial or resource investment. But always try to be honest with yourself. Do not step into that trap and have the guts to also kill your own darlings. I really find that a great quote. Kill your own darlings. If you have, as an entrepreneur, never created or never grown the ability to kill your own darlings, you are not ready for the big game, for the big entrepreneurial pièce de la résistance. You need to have that in order to do something in the long run, because there will, in a long run, long term project, in your huge masterpiece as an entrepreneur, there will be aspects, there will be darlings that you will have to kill along the way. And so, my call to you for today, and then we end this alignment with strategic goals, is: do you know your strategy? Do you know the goals of your company very well? And do you understand from an holistic point of view how your projects fit into that? And next time when you bring a project, think about them and try to also talk about that. Try to make that clear how they add to that. Don't focus just on your project and on how it brings something for your unit. Also show that it is part of this long-term goal, the goals of your company, the vision of your company, because that's where an additional fit, an additional boost can come to your project. And if you think about past projects that you as an entrepreneur were not successful in selling to your management or bringing to your company, look at the communication that you did. Was talking about the corporate objective, the corporate goals, and how the project fitted to that. Was that part of it, or did you leave that out? And if you think back about it now, if you reflect about it today, was that potentially one of the reasons that added to it? It's not all. It's not always. It's never just one reason why a project is not approved. It's most of the time more than several reasons. But could this be one of the reasons? And if so, then try next time to come up with a way to actually bring this forward and use it as well. And with that, I would like to stop for today, end this 30-day live stream for today. And we will focus on building and leading an entrepreneurial team tomorrow. Also, something very special, because in the beginning, most of the time it's you, but after a while, you will gather an entrepreneurial team. And tomorrow, I will talk about how we can do that, how we can make that a success. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.